Thank you, everyone, for joining me once again for another live internet study round of an hour and a half, two-topic study. The entire study, as I always mention, is available on iTunes. The podcast version is the full hour and a half. The video versions get edited. You don't hear all of the content, meaning I often go off into elaborations on certain things as I'm reading down through my notes, and all those elaborations get contained in the audio, but the video versions don't get this. So just again, a plug for the podcast. You can get to it very easily through the video. If you're watching the video right now, scroll down into the description, look for the link where it talks about the audio, the MP3, iTunes, some words like that. There should be a link down there. Just click on that. And it'll take you straight. It'll just open up into the audio version. Otherwise, you can just go open up any browser, type in the phrase iTunes, and then my name, Ariel Hanavi, and the links will direct you. All right, the first segment of this hour and a half long study is the hour-long part, the hour and a half long study. The first segment is the hour-long Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. Look on your screen right now. We are in topic 14. We're actually still talking about Mystery Babylon discussion part 2, but we're into the part that I've labeled Excursus. I've created an essay entitled, well, it's not really an essay, it's an excursus, but it's a little longer than an essay. The title is chunky, meaty, like my excursus usually tend up being. I like to pick on myself. It's entitled The Death and Rebirth of Jerusalem, a Theological and Eschatological Study of Mystery Babylon, Regeneration, and Covenant Transformation. And let me just read the thesis real quick. It isn't very long, and then we'll jump right into where we left off. In this study, I argue that Revelation's portrayal of the total destruction of Mystery Babylon, understood as eschatological Jerusalem in my model and in Chris White's model, and we're not the only ones that hold that this is who Mystery Babylon is. Chris White's just a more vocal one. But I argue that the destruction and the portrayal that we read about can be interpreted as the annihilation of the city's corrupted covenantal identity rather than erasure of the city's ontological existence. So this proposal that I'm working from, my thesis, it corresponds actually to biblical patterns of personal regeneration, covenantal transformation, and Israel's promised future renewal. And if you think about it from that angle, I say when viewed through this lens, Revelation's language of absolute finality describes the irrevocable end of Jerusalem's harlot identity, so that the redeemed Jerusalem of the millennium and ultimately the new Jerusalem can emerge. So what we're going to look at tonight is point number 5 of, there's still only 9 points in this this excursus, but we're going to jump into the paradox resolved, destruction, restoration, and Jerusalem's flood through the lens of baptism. All right, so the title changed a little bit. So let's just click on that. Give me a second, make sure that doesn't shrink on me like it did before. Okay, section 5, the paradox resolved, destruction, restoration, and Jerusalem's flood through the lens of baptism, right? Because we're talking about death, and baptism clearly is picturing death and resurrection, by the way. That's what baptism is, in case you didn't know. All right, let's read this, and I'll highlight it the way I normally do. The tension within Scripture is clear. Jerusalem is destroyed with absolute severity, yet simultaneously promised restoration and glory. So it creates a paradox. Mystery Babylon must die. And then if Mystery Babylon is Jerusalem, then this is where the paradox is created, the tension is created, and it's really the first, and I think natural objection to this thesis that Mystery Babylon is eschatological Jerusalem, is being very loyal to hold on to the truth of scriptures that teach that Jerusalem will be restored. No matter how wicked she gets in the end, she's going to be restored. We have to bring this out if we are to be able to understand this idea of she must be destroyed before she can be restored and renewed. So this paradox dissolves once we distinguish between the identity that is judged, harlot Jerusalem, and the ongoing existence of the city that will be restored. So it's the same city, but the destruction language that we read about in Revelation, as with many mysteries, is inclusive of physical destruction, but I think most of us focus only on that. For instance, if it's Mystery Babylon, if Mystery Babylon is New York, and we think about it being destroyed one day, we don't tend to flesh out the idea that maybe New York needs to be restored. I don't see that happening anyway. I mean, perhaps God will restore, but not in a bridal position. Jerusalem enjoying this candidate has a lot of traction. There's a lot of advantages to making it Jerusalem rather than being disadvantaged. I notice that I go on to say that within this particular framework of the death and restoration motif, then Mystery Babylon represents the death of Jerusalem's corrupted covenantal identity. Millennium Jerusalem stands as her restored and purified identity. And therefore, New Jerusalem is the consummation of her transformation in the eternal state. And the New Jerusalem, when I say eternal state here, I allowed for there to be a little bit of ambiguity between the position that I'm holding on to loosely, that New Jerusalem actually comes down at the beginning of the millennium, versus the traditional teaching that New Jerusalem comes down at the end of the millennium. Either position is open to me. I'm not going to follow my sword, as Tim Hague would say, for either position. But one of these days I'll maybe do an excursus study on showing you, using Janet Willis's research, who is also in line with Alan Kirshner, on the idea, the proposal that Mystery Babylon actually comes, Mystery Babylon, New Jerusalem actually comes down at the beginning of the millennium rather than at the end of the millennium. But let's keep going in my study here. Thus, what we're talking about when we look at Mystery Babylon having to undergo destruction, yes, there is destruction language. We're going to talk about that here in a moment. Chris White brings that point up heavily. But it's not necessary to only picture the physical destruction of Mystery Babylon, her getting burned, her getting flooded, things like that. It's also necessary to bring in the reality of Jerusalem being restored covenantally, spiritually, and then we can marry those two ideas up to one another. And thus, I say the same city undergoes death, resurrection, and glorification. This idea that I'm referring to parallels the logic of personal salvation, and it's very easy to see and very succinct. And this is quite biblical, has a lot of traction, has a lot of fidelity to the biblical pictures already being painted. Everywhere else in the Bible, the old self dies, the new creation emerges, and yet it's the same person. I now live, I die, but then I'm brought back to life. Even Yeshua himself, the body that went to the cross is the body that walked out of the tomb. Right? Am I right? Of course I'm right. It wasn't like they were looking at a different person. Now, obviously his body was transformed, but that's the whole point. The death and burial and resurrection results in a radical transformation of the person, primarily from the inside, but in Yeshua's case, it also represented a resurrection body that we also will enjoy one day. I can bring that motif, bring that theme in also, even though I didn't focus primarily in that direction. What is more, I say, when the prophets describe Jerusalem's end-time destruction as, ready for this language, coming with a flood. We can go back and read Daniel 9:26 to get this particular angle. What we end up realizing is that a few things. Number one, it's Jerusalem that is at the focal point in Daniel's prophecy at that moment. And this imagery, I notice, should not be read merely as a metaphor for overwhelming military force, although I think that's what we think about, especially when we remember that the preterists do have a little bit of truth to hold on to. The destruction that Daniel teaches about of Jerusalem and the armies coming against her and the temple being destroyed, the city being destroyed, and the temple being destroyed by the people of the prince who will come. There are, I believe, clearly first century implications in that. Near-far prophecy, prophetic telescoping going on. A little bit of what Daniel spoke about happened in the first century. Likewise, when Yeshua elaborated in his Olivet Discourse sermon to his disciples in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and Luke 21, those are the parts that capture that wording. We can clearly envision first century destruction of the temple in 70 AD, along with the eventual plowing under of Jerusalem in the 130s later on. We can see that language matches up, but the language is not exhausted. The prophecy isn't exhausted in the first century destruction. There's clearly future destruction waiting for Jerusalem, and we haven't seen that yet. So Daniel 9:26 kind of gives us this idea of talking about how that's going to be destroyed with a flood. And we have to start looking elsewhere into the Tanakh to see if there's other language that's reserved for Mystery Babylon, whoever she might be, that also includes flood language. And surprisingly, well, not surprising, I should say, there actually is. Let's keep going in that direction. Within the broader symbolic world of Scripture, right, watch this connection, water consistently functions as a mechanism of transition, a divinely appointed means by which death gives way to new life. So what I want you to think about now is, notice the flood could easily stand in for the baptism, and that would end up giving us some more angle to work from the idea that Jerusalem is eschatological. Eschatological Jerusalem is Mystery Babylon. So seen through this biblical lens, we could say that the flood, quote unquote, that destroys Mystery Babylon is not arbitrary devastation, but a form of corporate baptism through which Jerusalem's old apostate identity must die so that a renewed, purified identity can emerge. Yeah, this has a lot of biblical traction here, so that I don't feel like I'm speculating too much with this idea that Mystery Babylon turns out to be end-time Jerusalem. It becomes necessary to see how she can go through a death only in order to be reborn. And the baptism motif fits very, very well. Has, like I said, a lot of fidelity. In biblical theology, water almost never represents destruction alone. The flood, for instance, in Noah's day destroyed the wicked world, but preserved the righteous remnant, right? Same flood of waters. The Red Sea drowned Egypt while birthing Israel as a redeemed nation. Baptism itself signifies immersion into death so that one may walk in newness of life. And this is something that every Christian understands. So I'm happy that my good friend reminded me to bring this back in, that I didn't have it there before. It was in my outline version, didn't show up in the final version. Now it's here in this final version. So it fits exactly where it should be. Peter explicitly links these themes, identifying the flood as a topological precursor to baptism in 1 Peter 3:20-21. Judgment, therefore, is not merely punitive, it is regenerative. And I want to go on that angle for a little while and watch how well this works into my excursus here. So what I'm going to say is that applying this pattern to eschatological Jerusalem, the city's destruction as Mystery Babylon actually functions as a severe mercy. God does not annihilate Jerusalem in order to erase her from history. This is not supersessionism. This is not replacement theology. This is not the version where Jerusalem falls and she's down for the count, never to rise again. This is not spiritually seen through the rejection of Israel as a people because she rejected her Messiah. Therefore, God had to reject her and turn to a new people group known as the church. That's not how this works. Instead, because God always recognized Israel as his covenant partner, even though she is in blindness, God will not be thwarted. His plans will not be thwarted. God will not be fooled. He will have a people for himself. There's going to be a lot of carnage. There's going to be a lot of pruning. There's going to be a lot of death before she rises as the bride that she's always meant to be. But this pattern is entirely scriptural. So, let me say that one again. God does not annihilate Jerusalem in order to erase her from history, but in order to kill what she has become. She's poisoned at the heart level. She's sick. Her head is sick. What does the prophet say? The sickness goes from the head all the way down to the feet. There's nothing that's not sick about her. The harlot city cannot be reformed. She must die. We've got to understand the severity of the problem that Jerusalem is faced with at the moment. Only through death can rebirth occur. There's nothing redeemable about the old man, which is it's necessary for the old man to completely die. He must not survive. We must actually be reborn. That's why Yeshua said to Nathanael, you must be born again. And he's like, born again? You mean there'll be a second version of me? The old guy's not even going to be around? And radically speaking, I think Jesus would have said to him, yeah, the old guy's got to die. The new one has to live in order. The old one has to die in order for the new one to live. They can't both be alive. There can't be an old man and a new man at the same time. The old gives way to the new.